The scent of expensive pine and roast beef usually signals warmth, but in the Marshall Mansion, it just means another performance. I'm Paige, and at 32, I've spent 5 Christmases navigating this gilded cage. Tonight, like every year, I'm in the kitchen, carefully arranging canapes on a silver platter, a task Marlene, my mother-in-law, always assigns me. She's the matriarch, a woman whose every movement is designed to command attention, and she rarely acknowledges me directly. To her, I'm simply Andrew's wife. Andrew's. The dining room, already buzzing with the clinking of crystal and forced laughter, feels miles away. I can hear Andrew's charming laugh, a sound that always makes me feel a little more alone. He's in there, probably holding court, completely oblivious to the quiet dread that settles over me each holiday season. When the gift-giving began, the charade reached its peak. Gianna, Andrew's older sister, unwrapped a designer handbag, her shriek of delight echoing through the room. Bethany, the younger sister, got a matching one, though hers was a different color, of course. Then came my turn. Marlene handed me a small, awkwardly wrapped package. Inside was a bottle of discount hand lotion and a chipped, worn mug that looked like it belonged in a garage sale. "For your tea, dear," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I forced a smile back, clutching the mug. Andrew, my husband, caught my eye from across the room. He just shrugged, a familiar, dismissive gesture. Later, when I mentioned it to him quietly, he just sighed. "Paige, you're too sensitive. It's just a gift." He doesn't get it. He never does. I've started writing things down, little notes in a private journal I keep hidden. Not for any grand purpose, not yet. Just to remember, to document. It's a strange kind of therapy, seeing their casual cruelty laid out in black and white. As Gianna and Bethany dissolved into laughter over some private joke, their new handbags gleaming under the chandelier, I looked up. Thomas, Andrew's father, frail and quiet in his armchair, was watching me. His gaze was direct, and for a split second, I caught a knowing look in his eyes. He saw it all. That knowing look from Thomas, my father-in-law, lingered with me long after the Christmas dinner ended. It was a silent acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the perfectly polished facade of the Marshall family. It also brought back a year's worth of memories, a stark contrast to the superficiality I'd just endured. For the past year, Thomas's health had been steadily declining. It started subtly, with a few extra doctor's appointments, then progressed to regular hospital visits and needing more help around the house. And for the past year, it had almost always been me driving him. Andrew was always too busy with work, or golf, or some other pressing engagement. Marlene, Gianna, and Bethany? They were too occupied with charity galas, spa days, or planning their next extravagant vacation. Their visits to Thomas were rare, brief, and often felt more like an obligation than genuine concern. I didn't mind. Not really. Thomas, despite his frailty, was a good man. He was quiet, but observant, and he treated me with a respect I rarely received from the rest of the family. We'd sit for hours in his study, sometimes just in comfortable silence, other times talking about books or the quiet beauty of his garden. He'd listen intently when I spoke, something Andrew rarely did. Those moments, away from the demanding glare of Marlene, were a strange kind of solace. One afternoon, I was helping Thomas back to his room after a checkup when I overheard Gianna on the phone in the hallway. "Oh, it's just Paige's caretaker campaign," she scoffed into the receiver, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's practically moved in. Honestly, the lengths some people go to." Bethany giggled in the background. My blood ran cold. They saw my care, my genuine concern, as a calculated move. Later that night, after I'd made Thomas a light dinner and settled him into bed, he called me back. The room was dim, lit only by a bedside lamp. He reached under his pillow, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. Paige, he whispered, his voice raspy. This is for after. Don't open it until then. And don't tell anyone I gave it to you. He pressed it into my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. The weight of it felt significant. A secret entrusted to me alone. The sealed envelope Thomas gave me stayed tucked away in my sock drawer. A silent promise. Its presence was a constant reminder of his quiet trust, and it fueled my own secret project, the journal. What I'd started as a simple way to process the slights from the Marshall family had evolved. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It was evidence. Every dismissive comment, every backhanded compliment, every instance of being excluded. I noted it all. The date, the exact words, who said them, how I felt. It was a meticulous record of their indifference, a silent testament to the emotional damage they inflicted. A few months after that Christmas, during one of Marlene's notoriously tense Sunday dinners, Bethany, who was 31, looked across the table at me, a smirk playing on her lips. So, Paige, she said, her voice a little too sweet, have you found a job yet? Or are you still enjoying your extended vacation? The implication was clear. I, Andrew's wife, early 30s, was a burden, a drain. I'd worked before marrying Andrew, but the Marshall expectation was that I manage the household, which mostly meant managing their social calendar in Thomas's care. Andrew, 35, just cleared his throat and took a long sip of wine. He didn't defend me. Later, when we were alone, I tried to talk to him about it. It's just constant, Andrew. The way they talk to me. He waved a dismissive hand. Paige, you need to let it go. They're just being themselves. You know how they are. His indifference was a dull ache, a familiar pain. I found myself confiding more in Bonnie Palmer, a family friend in her 40s who was often at these gatherings. Bonnie was sharp, with a kind but knowing glint in her eyes. Over coffee one afternoon, I vented about Bethany's comment and Andrew's reaction. Bonnie listened patiently, then leaned forward. Paige, she said, her voice low, I've seen how they treat you. You need to watch out for yourself. This family, they're not subtle about what they want, and they're even less subtle about who they don't want. Her words resonated deeply. That night, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard voices from Marlene's study, the door slightly ajar. It was Marlene, her voice hushed but firm. Andrew, you need to keep Paige in line. Don't let her get any ideas. She's Andrew's wife. Nothing more, nothing less. We can't have her thinking she's one of us. Andrew mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, but the implication was devastatingly clear. My suspicions were confirmed. They didn't just dismiss me. They actively wanted me powerless. The conversation I overheard between Marlene and Andrew solidified a cold certainty in me. They weren't just indifferent. They were strategic. The journal entries grew more pointed, less about my feelings, and more about their calculated actions. As the months passed, Thomas's health took a sharp turn for the worse. The quiet dignity he'd maintained began to fade, replaced by increasing weakness and pain. The hospital became a second home. And as before, I was the constant presence. Andrew would visit briefly, usually after a call from me, looking uncomfortable in the sterile environment. Marlene, Gianna, and Bethany made even rarer appearances, citing busy schedules or fear of germs. In his final days, Thomas was mostly lucid, though his voice was barely a whisper. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, the beeping of machines the only other sound. One afternoon, he squeezed my hand. Paige, he rasped, his eyes fixed on mine. Thank you. For everything. You were the only one. Loyal in the ways that matter. A tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. I've seen it all, my dear. Don't worry. I've put things in place. To make things right. His words were a balm, a validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. He passed away peacefully a few hours later. with just me by his side. The funeral was a grand affair, orchestrated by Marlene with the precision of a seasoned event planner. She was the picture of the grieving widow, accepting condolences with a stoic grace that belied her usual sharp edges. She subtly, but effectively, sidelined me, ensuring I was always a step behind, an accessory rather than a family member in mourning. Andrew, caught in his mother's orbit, barely registered my presence. Meanwhile, Gianna and Bethany, dressed in expensive black, were already whispering about the future. I overheard snippets near the reception buffet. The summer house would be perfect for us, Gianna mused, while Bethany nodded, and the antiques, we'll have to divide them fairly. Their father was barely in the ground, and they were already carving up his legacy. A few days later, a text from Bethany landed in our family chat, discussing plans for a memorial luncheon. It listed Marlene, Gianna, and Bethany as organizers, with no mention of me. Andrew was included, of course. When I asked him about it, he just mumbled, "Oh, they probably just forgot, honey. You know how busy they are." But I knew better. It wasn't an oversight. It was a subtle, deliberate exclusion, a clear signal that with Thomas gone, my utility to the family was officially over, and Andrew, as always, stayed quiet. A year had passed since that first Christmas dinner. A year since Thomas gave me that knowing look. A year since I started my journal. Now Christmas approached again, the first one without Thomas. Marlene, ever the stickler for tradition, insisted that everything must proceed as usual. The mansion was once again awash in the scent of pine and roast beef, but this time it felt colder, hollower. I was once again relegated to the kitchen, preparing the elaborate feast, while Marlene, Gianna, and Bethany held court in the living room. The dynamic hadn't changed, only intensified. Without Thomas's quiet presence, there was no one to even offer a knowing look. I was truly an outsider now, a ghost in their opulent machine. The gift-giving ritual commenced with the same predictable fanfare. Gianna and Bethany shrieked with delight over their new designer jewelry, a matched set, of course. Then came my turn. Marlene presented me with a small flat box. Inside was a cheap, mass-produced calendar featuring generic landscape photos. "For your planning, dear," she said, her smile as brittle as ever. It was another trivial gift, another calculated insult, a stark contrast to the luxury items lavished on her daughters. I clenched my jaw, the familiar sting of humiliation a dull throb. My journal entries had grown sharper, fueled by a simmering anger and exhaustion that had replaced my earlier quiet dread. I wrote about the calendar, about the way Marlene had dismissed my suggestion for a simpler menu, about Andrew's continued silence. It wasn't just self-preservation anymore. It was a record of injustice, a quiet demand for recognition. The air around the dinner table was thick with unspoken expectations. The family gossiped openly about Thomas's estate, their voices hushed, but their intentions clear. "I heard the market had a good year," Gianna whispered to Bethany, who nodded eagerly. "Father always was shrewd with his investments." Marlene chimed in, "Of course, the house will need some updates, but it's a solid asset." They spoke as if the inheritance was already theirs, a foregone conclusion, simply waiting to be divided. Andrew, as usual, offered no opinion, just nodded along. Suddenly, the front door chimed. Marlene looked annoyed. She hadn't expected anyone else. A moment later, the housekeeper ushered in a man in a dark suit, carrying a slim briefcase. It was Corbin Sanderson, Thomas's lawyer, a man in his 50s with a calm, professional demeanor. His presence here, at Christmas dinner, was both unexpected and ominous. The room fell silent, the festive atmosphere instantly shattered. Corbin Sanderson's unexpected arrival at the Christmas dinner sent a ripple of unease through the room. Marlene, ever composed, quickly regained her footing. "Corbin, what a surprise. Is everything all right?" she asked, a hint of steel in her voice. Corbin, a man in his 50s, offered a polite but firm smile. Marlene, Andrew, Gianna, Bethany, Paige, my apologies for the intrusion on your holiday. However, I have been instructed by Thomas to read his last will and testament at the earliest possible convenience, and given the family is assembled, this seemed the most appropriate time. A hush fell over the dining room, broken only by the crackling fire. The smug expectation on Marlene's, Gianna's, and Bethany's faces was almost palpable. They straightened in their seats, anticipation practically radiating from them. Andrew looked mildly surprised, but quickly settled into a look of passive interest. I, on the other hand, felt a strange calm descend. The chipped mug, the discount lotion, the calendar. Every slight flashed through my mind, replaced by Thomas's knowing look and the sealed envelope still hidden in my sock drawer. I steeled myself, a quiet resolve hardening my gaze. Corbin cleared his throat, pulling a thick document from his briefcase. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the room. As per Thomas Marshall's explicit instructions, I will now read his last will and testament. He began with the usual legal preamble, listing names and dates, the mundane details of an estate. The family shifted impatiently, eager for the main event. Then, Corbin's voice changed, taking on a more deliberate tone. He read through a few minor bequests to distant relatives and charities, which were met with barely concealed eye rolls from Gianna and Bethany. Finally, he reached the core of the document. And now, for the primary distribution of the estate. Thomas Marshall, in sound mind and body, hereby bequeaths the entirety of his estate, including the primary residence located at 1450 Elmwood Drive, all financial assets totaling approximately $4.3 million, and all personal property, to the person who showed unwavering loyalty, compassion, and genuine care in the quiet ways that matter most during his final years. Corbin paused, letting the words hang in the air. The family leaned forward, their faces a mixture of confusion and greedy anticipation. He then looked directly at me. That person, as explicitly named in this will, is Paige Marshall. The room plunged into a stunned silence, so profound I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. Marlene's face went from expectant to ashen. Gianna's jaw dropped, her new designer necklace suddenly looking cheap. Bethany's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into a furious glare. The atmosphere, a second ago filled with smug expectation, was now electric with betrayal and burgeoning rage. The silence shattered. Marlene was the first to erupt, her face a mask of furious disbelief. "This is preposterous! A trick! Corbin, you must be mistaken. My husband would never—" "This is a forgery!" Gianna shrieked, jumping to her feet, knocking over her wine glass. "She manipulated him. He was frail, vulnerable." Bethany, her face blotchy with rage, pointed a trembling finger at me. "You gold-digging opportunist. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? Your caretaker campaign. Accusations flew, a whirlwind of betrayal and entitlement." Andrew, caught in the crossfire, looked utterly bewildered. He turned to me, his voice strained. "Paige, what is this? You need to fix this. Explain it to them." But I didn't move. I didn't speak. Every slight, every insult, every moment of exclusion flashed through my mind. The worn mug, the discount lotion, the calendar, Bethany's snide remarks, Marlene's dismissive tone, Andrew's apathy. It wasn't my hand, but Thomas's, that had delivered this karmic justice. I remained composed, a quiet strength settling over me. Marlene, regaining some of her matriarchal control, rounded on Corbin. "This will is invalid. We'll contest it. Thomas was not in his right mind." Corbin, ever calm, held up a hand. "Marlene, with all due respect, Thomas Marshall was of sound mind. Furthermore, he anticipated such a challenge." He then opened a second, smaller envelope. He provided me with extensive documentation. dated notes, video recordings of his conversations with Paige, and even a detailed log of family visits, or lack thereof, over the past year. He specifically noted the dates and times Paige drove him to appointments, stayed with him in the hospital, and provided daily care, contrasted with the absence of others. My journal. Thomas had been keeping his own record, corroborating mine. The sealed envelope he'd given me, still in my sock drawer, suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't just seen it. He'd documented it too. Marlene's face crumpled, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking. You conniving little," she began, her voice dripping with venom, trying to tear me down one last time. But I cut her off, my voice clear and steady, surprising even myself. "No, Marlene, I'm not conniving. I'm the one who sat by his side when he was sick. I'm the one who listened to him, who cared for him. While you and your daughters were busy with your galas and your handbags, I was here. And Andrew," I turned to my husband, "you stood by and let them treat me like dirt. You never once defended me." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence born of shock and defeat. I had won. The aftermath of the will reading was swift and brutal. Marlene, Gianna, and Bethany launched a frantic, but ultimately futile, legal challenge. Corbin's evidence, bolstered by Thomas's meticulous records and my own journal entries, was incontrovertible. The Marshalls had no leg to stand on. My marriage to Andrew, however, fractured beyond repair. He packed his bags a week later, his face a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "You destroyed my family, Paige," he accused, his voice cold. "You could have just let it go. Now look what you've done." He blamed me, not his family's cruelty, not his own inaction. I watched him go, feeling a profound sadness, but also a strange sense of liberation. The man I married was gone, replaced by someone who prioritized appearances and his mother's approval over me. The Marshalls made sure I was ostracized. Whispers followed me in town, cold shoulders in the grocery store, invitations that mysteriously stopped arriving. But then, there were the quiet acknowledgments. Bonnie Palmer, the family friend, sought me out for coffee a few days later. She simply squeezed my hand and said, "Good for you, Paige. Thomas knew, and now everyone else does too." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Now I sit in the sprawling living room of what is officially my house. The Christmas decorations have been taken down, the scent of pine faded. The silence is vast, but it's a different kind of silence than before. It's not the oppressive quiet of being ignored. It's the peace of solitude. I hold the chipped, worn mug Marlene gave me that first Christmas, the one meant to remind me of my lesser status. I fill it with tea, the warmth seeping into my hands. Punishment came full circle, not by my hand, but by Thomas's. He had seen it all, understood it all, and in his final act, he had made things right. The house, the money, the validation, it all belonged to me. Revenge, I admit, tastes sweet. It's a rich, complex flavor, tinged with the satisfaction of finally being seen, of justice served. But it's also bittersweet. The loneliness is real, the scars of years of emotional abuse still present. Andrew is gone, and the family I married into